everyone. I'm Ekta and we are Read a Kitab. And I'm extremely excited today to have, Scott Alexander Howard today, the author of Other Valley. We are going to have a very, very interesting conversation with him. In the meanwhile, Neeraj is there and Abhishek is there. I'll just add them to talk to the author of The Other Valley, Scott Alexander Howard. Okay, I think I'm not able to add them. I'll just try again. Hi Neeraj. Hi Abhishek.
Hi,
Oh wow,
hi,
he's
good
in
evening.
black.
Oh,
Hi, how are
coincidentally,
you
we are all
guys?
wearing. Oh, wow, lovely.
And I think my earring is on your shirt too. So yeah.
Oh, oh,
But yeah, hi everyone. Thank you for joining us. And I can see a lot of people joining us. I'm waiting for Scott Alexander Howard to join us today for this amazing live that we're going to have with him today. And I'm so excited because the book is fabulous and thoroughly enjoyed reading it. Hi Urvi. Hi Anandan. Hi Gaver. Hi everyone. I'll just wait for the author to join in. So allow me a minute. I'll just try to add the author. All right. So I've sent him the invitation. Let's see. Let's wait out for him to join. Hi Pramesh. Thank you for joining us. Oh, hi Alexander. How are
hi.
you?
Good. How are you
Hi
doing?
Scott.
Hi.
Hi,
Nice to see you
Hi.
all.
Scott.
How are
How are
you?
you?
Good. How are you?
How are you doing?
Great. Great. Oh, and this is such a coincidence that all of us are wearing black and you are wearing black
Yeah, a
too.
little bit. Cover that up.
Hi, Scott. So I'm Ekta and I have with me Neeraj.
Hi, Scott. How are you? This is Neeraj.
Hi.
And I have with me Abhishek as well.
Hi, Scott.
Hi.
How are you doing?
Good.
Great. So, yeah, all the readers who've joined us and everybody who's joined us, let me just tell you that we are looking forward to this amazing conversation today that we are going to have with Scott Alexander Howard, the author of The Other Valley. And we are so blown away by the book. We are fascinated to talk to Scott today. And just to tell you, Scott, last month, like you're aware, it was our book of the month. And the tribe enjoyed the book thoroughly. We had a very interesting conversation as well within the community discussing your book. So I don't think so. I need to introduce you, and because everybody knows you by now in the community, and we so loved your work, so loved the book that you have written. So I'll straight away dive into this question, asking you if you had a choice, which direction would you go, east or west?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for choosing the book, and I'm so happy to talk to you today. And I'm glad that that it was a fruitful discussion with your book club. I I think that when it comes to which way I would choose, I think I would go west to the past. I think I have kind of a nostalgic temperament, and I also think that it's the rare opportunity. You know, like you can. I'll eventually find out what happens in the future if I just kind of wait around for 20 years and manage not to pass away, I suppose. But so I'm kind of patient in that way. You know, I wrote a philosophy dissertation. That takes forever. I'm a pretty patient person. Yeah, I think I would go to the past, even though it's more dangerous. But I think it's more, to me, it's more interesting. I don't know. How about you guys?
It's
Wow,
also
this
going to
is
the West is more guarded. Like, you can't really go to the West so easily.
True. Yeah. Harder to get permission.
Yes, harder to get permission.
so yeah, and I mean, this was such a brilliant answer, and we were kind of thinking and we were discussing within ourselves while we were debating about, after we read the book, and I was not able to reach to any conclusion, to be very
Mm.
honest. I don't know what Neeraj and Abhishek think about it, and
In
that's why
fact,
we thought we'll ask you.
yeah, it's one of those one of those books. I mean, obviously, this has been talked about a lot. That it asks many questions than it answers, and of course, we have so many questions. And this is again interesting. I was really split. Should I go west? Should I go east? And I was like, okay, we probably should ask the author himself. And but this answer did surprise me. By the way, your answer.
Oh, really?
Yes.
I guess
I would go
there's a
east.
third. Sorry, you go east. You go. Okay. Yeah. There's there's also the third answer, which is in a way maybe the most compatible with the book in general, is to just not go anywhere, you know, as Odile says at the very start, in her kind of naive way, maybe obeying what her mother tells her to write. But one could just say, I don't want to see, I'm going to just like live in my own time and not experience those other places. You know? But I don't know. That's a little bit boring to me.
So true. Yeah. And that's such an easy choice as well to make.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So speaking about, you know, I had this question and I thought that I must ask you that I saw that in one of your Instagram stories, you did share that your book was also trending #1 in metaphysics. And and talk about the various genres that your book is about. It's speculative fiction. For some people, it is science fiction. Although there is a dearth of technology, not many people from the East are actually traveling back and bringing all those technological gadgets. So I just wanted to know, what's your take on this? Also, I would want you to comment on the metaphysics part of it.
Well, first of all, the metaphysics, I mean, it's funny because this happens to philosophers a lot of the time too. You know, like your book touches on metaphysics in an academic sense, and then you find that like you're suddenly a bestseller in metaphysics alongside things like the Celestine Prophecy or self-help kind of books, which are fine, but they have nothing to do with each other. You know, it's a very big category. But it was funny to me that it was it was #1 in metaphysics. I'm not sure how long on the UK Kindle store, and those were the kinds of books that it was with. Were like, you know, the talking to God sort of books. I think that when it comes to genre, because you were kind of touching on whether this is sci-fi, there's no technology in it. I'm pretty neutral about what genre to call the book. I think that most people are receiving it as a kind of science fiction, although there's some fantasy sort of elements too, you know. Time travel is traditionally a sci-fi sort of trope, you know. Most books that are time travel books have some kind of sci-fi genre trappings. And then this book doesn't really have a lot of those trappings. It's very much, you know, it's low tech, it's rustic, it's kind of old fashioned. There's no time machine, for example. So yeah, I kind of just think of it as maybe like, I guess it is high concept or something like that. You know, it's just like, there was actually a book that I've heard of called The Wall by Marlene Haushofer, is an Austrian writer from the 60s, I believe. And somebody who was reviewing her book called it premise fiction, just, you know, fiction that proceeds by, it's kind of, I mean, all fiction has a premise, you know, so it's a little bit of an undetermined name. But what this critic meant by it was a premise that sort of is different from the usual rules of reality, but then everything else beyond that is played out realistically, the way that things would actually happen in this world. And I think it kind of falls into that category. You know, it's a little bit like speculative fiction in the sense that there's one big change and everything else is sort of done in a realist sort of tone. And I always knew I wanted to make the book feel like that.
And it does feel like that. I must say that, you know, the entire thing rests on the premise that is there, and it kind of encapsulates you while you're reading it. And there is so much that at every step you're thinking, okay, what's going to happen? What's happening? You are, you know, kind of stuck there. So, you know, it kind of gives the reader also a lot of playground to, you know, think about what's happening. And that is what, you know, kind of, I think attracted all of us too much.
That's great. That's great to hear that it actually, like, you know, gives your mind sort of room to play around.
In fact, I guess the people, the thing that is associated with the book, that is the Other Valley, is time travel. But I somehow felt like it's like people are stuck in a sort of a time loop in their time zones, in their particular valleys, wherever it's like sort of a time loop, but it's a very unconventional time loop. If you think of time loops, it's a very unconventional thing still, even if it's a time loop. So would you agree with that? Or was this how you set out to be if you were writing a time travel book?
I mean, I think of time loops. I'm interested to hear more about what you think about the time loop sort of genre or device, because I think of time loops as like Groundhog Day. Do you know that movie? So, like you wake up the same morning and you relive the same day every day. It's like Nietzsche's eternal return or something. And this one's a little bit different from that insofar as time just proceeds linearly and there's no real kind of looping back in that sense. But I do think that because your life is always reoccurring in another place, in the sort of the grand scheme, there is kind of that time loop happening. Like presumably, everything that has ever happened in this world and ever will happen is happening somewhere at some point.
Yes.
Like Odile will continue to be born for eternity, but it's just going to be farther and farther away from the valley where we are now.
Exactly.
So in that sense, it is a time.
So this is how you set out to write, or it just happened while you were trying to write this book?
I think that element. Yeah, I think that element was just kind of like logically entailed by the setup. Sorry, can you hear there's somebody like doing a chainsaw outside of my house? I hope it's not coming through on the video. Like
No,
10
it's not
a.m.
coming through.
It's not
Okay.
coming through.
Yeah, I think that once I had the idea of this valley kind of continuing forever in both directions, I think that a lot of those things kind of just fell out of it. I knew that there would be this, I think from the very start, it was kind of this vision of eternity, of infinite time and space kind of proceeding in these two directions. I thought about where the idea came from because it kind of came out of nowhere one day. And, there was a context with some personal loss and, some friends who were passing away. But also I think that influenced the reason why time travel is always about mourning and grief in this world. But I think that also some of my academic background sort of set the stage for it. So, and this wasn't plain to me at the time, but I think that, for example, in Plato, there's a late dialogue called the Timaeus, but it's not the kind of Plato dialogue that most people read. There's a couple that we read, like the Symposium and the Apology, and then the late stuff is really hard to read and quite boring and difficult to understand. But in one of those later dialogues, there is this kind of creation myth about time, and it's a very cryptic phrase, and nobody really knows how to interpret it. But time is said to be the moving image of eternity. Time is the moving image of eternity. And I don't quite know what that means, but when I imagine it, I sort of imagine like an aerial view of this infinite space, and it's all dark, but there's this one spotlight kind of moving over it, and it's hot, and it's lighting up, the present as it moves. But that implies that all the other times still exist somewhere in that dark landscape. And so I think that my own kind of interpretation of the Timaeus creation myth of time probably subliminally had some impact on where the idea came from, but I didn't realize that until after I was writing the book. A lot of those things come out later. Like, oh, I might have ripped that off from Plato 2,000 years ago.
Wow. And this is so amazing to hear, because there are a lot of questions that kind of were left unanswered in the book, and we had so much to think about it. But having said that, when I was reading the book, I found a lot of reminiscence to Margaret Atwood and particularly Kazuo Ishiguro. And while I was reading The Other Valley, I was all the time thinking about Never Let Me Go. And I was also thinking about Clara and the Sun. And I was just thinking that, how, there are a lot of questions. These books do not talk directly, or, it's very abstract writing, and which I found in The Other Valley also, because it is such a stellar writing. And when I was reading, I was so engrossed in it, and I was thinking that, there's so much of reminiscence, and I was just kind of relating it to a lot of books. So, just wanted to understand from you, Scott, I mean, how did that particular, angle comes into picture? Because, both of these are such celebrated authors. And I'm sure, you are going to be one. We love the book so much.
Thank you so much. I think that certainly as far as genre goes, something like The Handmaid's Tale looms large, especially in Canada. I think that, again, it kind of goes back to that sort of premise fiction idea that I was talking about, where, that's played very realistically, and actually in The Handmaid's Tale, nothing really metaphysically different happens. It's just a political story. And I think Atwood was very adamant when she wrote it and promoted that book to say that everything that had happened in that book had already happened somewhere in the world. And that's why she disagreed with calling it science fiction. She invented the term speculative fiction, as far as I know, in order to sort of distinguish The Handmaid's Tale from things that involve like interstellar travel.
Yeah.
But I think that, yeah, so I mean, in that sense, but I think that Ishiguro is the bigger influence on me. It was a huge influence, obviously. I think that, yeah, Never Let Me Go, that kind of elegiac, you know, nostalgic, that kind of writing set in, and that very plain spoken tone that he has, but set in a sort of lightly dystopian world. I think that was really eye-opening for me. I felt like I had, you know, I had permission to write something similar. I was like, well, if Ishiguro can do this, then surely we can all try too. Yeah, it's interesting. I think that maybe I've talked about Ishiguro a little bit before too. His first book, Pale View of Hills, was actually maybe even a bigger influence on this one. And I can't really say why without talking about spoilers, but I guess you guys have already read the books. There's a little bit of, there's a little bit of, at the very end of Pale View of Hills, it's one of the great twists in literature. You know, it's his first book, so, you know, he himself has said like, oh, you know, it's kind of juvenilia in a way, but I think it's great. There's a sentence that changes the entire book. Just one sentence near the very end that reveals the identity of a character, just kind of as an aside, you know, and you're like, oh my God. And it's one of those, you know, they say about a perfect twist, you know, like you can do you can always have a twist in a book just by introducing new information or something, but then it doesn't really count. You're just like, well, that's not fair. No, I had no way of knowing that before. But a good twist is one that seems completely inevitable as soon as you read it, but you also had no idea it was coming. And I feel like what happens at the end of that book is like that as well. I don't have something quite like that in The Other Valley, but I do have something on the last page that I think kind of reopens a lot of questions about the consequences of what Odile has done. And I was definitely thinking about A Pale View of Hills at the end there, and just trying on my own, not as good way to achieve something similar. Yeah, Ishiguro is the best.
Fantastic. So I think, you know, we read it correctly.
Very much, yeah.
Because all the time, yeah.
I wanted to when we read most of the books, we like our protagonists to be like strong, optimistic, you know, standing up and all that. But in this case, Odile in many instances comes across very passive. She just accepts whatever is given to her, other than in the first part. Especially in the second part, you notice, like, you know, she's just it's all right, whatever happens. So is it difficult writing such character? Because I think it's very easy to show very people who are protesting, rebelling, you know, fighting for their rights and all that, wanting to get it. But stark opposite to that, somebody who's just, all right, you know what, whatever, let anything happen to me, it's okay. So is it very difficult writing a character like that?
Yeah, it is. I think that it is and it's not, because I think that it is kind of more true to life. Like I think that the very active protagonist is very true to literature. You know, and also film. You know, most stories that we read are people who are driven, and if you're one of the first lessons you learn in a writing class, whether it's for fiction or for literature or for like a screenplay, for example, it's always like your protagonist has to have a want. You know, we have to know their motivation, and they need to want that more than anything else in the world. Yes. And so you have a very driven sort of model for what a character even is. And I don't think that's necessarily true of us, especially as adults. As the world kind of imposes itself on us, we do kind of settle into our patterns and our habits, and it takes a lot for us to want to break out of those. So I think that maybe kind of the canonical characters of literature, they do in a way have more in common with adolescents, you know, people who haven't yet been beaten down by the world, so they feel like their will is endless and they can achieve anything. Odile is not really like that either, even as a teenager, but she's a bit more like that than she is as an adult. So the trick in the book is to try to go from a very passive, sort of accepting character at the start of part 2, and to get her to get off of her ass basically and change things for herself. That yeah, it is a challenge because the challenge is not so much in making it realistic because I think again that's just realistic about what adults are like.
Yeah.
You know,
Yes.
we're all passive in some ways, but it is difficult just as a literary endeavor to try to keep that interesting for the reader because we're so used to different kinds of characters. So I think that what happens in part two, first of all, some readers just drop off and they're like, God, I don't like this anymore. That's just, you know, a consequence. But I think that for me, what I tried to do was make the world more interesting because what Odile's position is in the second half as a gendarme is someone who has access to a lot more information about the way that this thing works, the metaphysics, the politics, the policies of the valleys. That stuff is suddenly something that we as readers have access to through her that we didn't in the first part when she's just learning about all this stuff herself. So I kind of trade the break between part one and part two sort of trades this sort of tragic love story for more kind of epistemic access, I guess. Like suddenly we're learning more about this world, and that kind of I'm hoping keeps the reader going until Odile's sort of will returns. And it doesn't really even take that long, you know, before it happens, but there is definitely kind of like a dip in the middle of the book that I think you have to kind of like, that I had to push the reader through by giving them something else to read for, which was knowledge, I think.
Right. True.
And I think I was also kind of wondering that the book basically makes a lot of, it asks a lot of questions. If you strip it off of its time traveling trope, if I can say that, it still works because there are a lot of relationships also. For example, Odile's relationship with her mother. Especially, at some point I felt that, in the second half, I was kind of expecting a lot, but not much happens over there. So I don't want to give away too much also for people who have not read. So I was thinking like, did you ever think that, it's the premise, because you also said that, it could be premise fiction. Did you ever feel that, the premise overtaking the larger questions that you actually intended to ask?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think that that's always a risk with, especially with time travel, which has such a huge kind of, there's so many precedents, there's so many time travel stories already. And I like to think that what The Other Valley does with it is a little bit different, but it also has similarities. I'm not going to say that it's 100% unique when it comes to the rules of time travel. A lot of that stuff, I think, is just the logic of how this stuff would work if time travel was real. You know, for example, going back in time, changing the past will change the future, and that you could undo the conditions of your own existence. For example, that's like the grandfather paradox. That's Back to the Future. You know, there's all these things that we've heard about and all read before, all watched, and so I never thought it was sufficient to just make the appeal of this book be the appeal of this world. I thought that the world was interesting. I thought it was unique, but I also knew that I couldn't just write a whole book that was like, look at this world, what a cool world. The end. You know, I needed to have stories that would stand on their own, even if this was not a time travel book, even if there was no strange metaphysics. So yeah, I did sometimes feel like when I was drafting it, there were times when I felt like it's getting too time travel-y, it's getting too much in the weeds here. And I tried to do as little of that as I possibly could get away with, you know? I think that the device of the vetting program for the Conseil apprenticeship in the first half was a nice way of being able to kind of achieve a lot of explication and exposition about the way this stuff works in a natural setting while also keeping it contained to just a few scenes. And so, yeah, but I did always feel like when I was having to write about the consequences and have Odile think about all the consequences of these things, I kind of felt like the clock was ticking every time I was writing those scenes. Like I want to get out of this scene as soon as I can and get back to kind of the emotional dynamics, the character dynamics, the descriptive sort of stuff. And just kind of, yeah, I didn't want to rest ever too much on the time travel device because, again, I didn't think it was ultimately the most original thing about the book. You know?
Also, when we were discussing this question, and we were talking about other characters in the book. I particularly want to add this, that which you also kind of talked about at the very beginning of the interview. You saying that you have this, that nostalgic element, which actually shows across in the book. So while
Okay.
you're reading the book, you have this sense of nostalgia coming in. The clock is always ticking, and you just want to know what's happening or what's going to happen or what has happened in the past. Or there is so much of there's kind of a stress, while you're kind of thinking what's going to happen, and there's so much that is going parallelly into a reader's mind. While I was reading this, I was all the time thinking about each and every character. Though even I was reading about Adele, I was thinking that what the other characters must be doing at this instance.
Mm.
So it is such brilliantly knotted together. So I was just thinking, had it been any other protagonist like Edme or Justin, or for that matter anybody who has the kind of they have the potential to be the front runners of the story,
Mm.
and if they would have been the main protagonist, would the story change?
I've never been asked that before. Hmm. I mean, I can't talk about how Edme would change the story because, I mean, the story would be shorter.
True.
It would be interesting. It would be interesting to talk about Len. I think I really liked him as
I
kind of a
was going
supporting
to
character.
say.
But
Yeah.
first for me, in addition to Odile and Edme, I always really enjoyed writing Joe and Alen. Joe, I don't think would be interesting to follow. I mean, she would be, but as far as the plot goes, I'm not sure what. No, okay, no, the plot would not be the same. I think that Odile is the only one who is, other than Alen, who's motivated to do the things that she does. I think Alen's story would also be more depressing, and you'd learn less because of what he does as a grown-up. But I think that, I mean, I'm very happy to hear that all the other characters were interesting enough that this thought even occurred to you, that there's like more to know about all of them. I don't know, maybe in a way, maybe Odile's mom, but then her story would be kind of similar to Odile's, you know? Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'd have to
I'm
think
sure
about
even you would have thought.
if it were Odile's mom, I think she would want to go back in the past and change her career. That is what she would be trying to do, I think.
Yeah, I think she'd.
Or change Odile's career or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
But
however,
yeah, I'm sure that we have given Scott enough food for thought so that he's gonna think about.
well, yeah, I mean, that's the interesting thing about this book is that I'm not writing a sequel to it, but I think.
Oh my God, we wanted to ask you that question.
I mean, I guess I could down the road. I'm writing something else that's different right now. That's completely different. But I think that, and I kind of needed a break from this world. I could imagine writing something down the road, like Atwood wrote the Testaments like 30 years after she wrote The Handmaid's Tale. But the interesting thing about the idea of a sequel would be that you can tell any number of stories within this world because the world never changes in a way. Like it's cultural, it's very static. I could just say, well, in 100 years from now, here's a whole new crop of characters in the same valley. You could, which might be a little bit cheap, but it's certainly possible. It's left open, and so they're trying to develop it for TV right now. And if it got picked up and it went on to like a second season, I think that that's something that they would consider. Is like, well, should we just maybe move and tell new stories within the same setup? That's an interesting thing about the premise, is that you can actually do that.
Yeah. Very, very excited. And we thought that we would ask you this question: is there a prequel or a sequel coming up?
I have like a bunch of notes about what would happen after the book, and partly that's because I wanted to make sure that like I was answering before, that I wanted to have the time travel stuff be as to have a light touch with that and to not lean on it too hard. At the same time, I wanted to make sure that everything that the story that I'm telling within the bounds of this book, like within just these pages, that everything kind of holds up. so that if you think about it more, and you think about the consequences of this story outside the bounds of this story, you know, like what happens 20 years later, what happened 20 years before, that everything within these pages would still make sense. You know, I wanted, if you were to make a big chart about the consequences of what happens and what happens at the end of this book, I wanted to make sure that that nothing would be kind of weirdly undone, for example. So I do have a big chart about other things that happen in the story. But again, I guess I could maybe write another one.
You know, but it is the end itself that raises so many questions, because I am sure that you might have revisited the end from various perspectives and dimensions as well, and in a way it was very surprising as a reader that I kind of knew what was coming, but was very surprised till the very last page. So was that something, that an alternative ending that you had in mind, or was this always going to be the ending?
There was, I think that it wasn't always going to be the ending. It was always kind of close to this. I knew that I wanted her to eventually go back. I knew that she had to go back eventually and to try to change things that happened. Originally, I was going to kind of shift. So I don't know how much I can say without being too spoilery, but maybe I just will be spoilery and it's okay.
Yeah.
Where we get to at the end of the book is we sort of shift to the young Odile again, briefly. And that wasn't always the ending. The ending was originally going to be a shift, but it was going to shift to the adult Odile after the changes that her other counterpart had achieved. What happens to the adult Odile, what her 36-year-old self is like now. And I had ideas for that, but I ended up thinking it was more interesting to go back to the younger version. And yeah, that didn't occur to me until like midway through. I think I, for a long time, was assuming, now it doesn't make any sense to me why I would have thought that it was more interesting to go to the old one again. That's the annoying thing about writing, is that so many of the big epiphanies that you have are so obvious to you as soon as they occur to you, that for a second you're happy, you're like, oh, I figured it out. And then the next second you're like, why did it take me so long to figure that out? That's so easy. So there's a certain kind of self-punishment that occurs. But yeah, no, it wasn't always the ending, but it was always kind of a cousin of the ending.
Cousin of the ending.
Amazing. And Scott, one question on a lighter note, maybe, there are a lot of, so while we were interviewing Daisy Rockwell, who's also the International Booker Prize winner, for 2021, there was this unique thing that, she talked about, it's not unique, but, she kind of coined this word. And she said that, when male writers generally, and a lot of authors, she kind of referred to a lot of Japanese authors as well. So there is this way of writing, books wherein it's written from a male gaze perspective, and the women is kind of sexualized, and so she called it like boob writing or boobism. So so she very explicitly mentioned that when I'm reading narratives from male writers, there's a lot of boobism that is involved in it. And so when we see it in Other Valley, though we know that Odile has has sexual desires and a lot of other things that the book talks about. I'm not giving away much, but the way it is written is so stellar that nowhere it feels that there is there's no sexualization, there's no objectification of Odile, or for that matter anybody. And it doesn't come across as the male gaze having it sexualized. So I wanted to ask you that was that a deliberate approach, or how did you sort about writing it in that way? That's one. And second is, for all the male writers who's writing the main protagonist to be female, what inspiration do you think they should draw from the book that you've written, The Other Valley?
Oh yeah, well, okay, so yeah, I think that definitely, I know the kind of writing you're talking about, and I also what Daisy's talking about. There's kind of you might have seen this too. I don't remember the source, but somebody made a joke about how when a male writer is writing, at least a straight male writer is writing a woman, you know, she boobs boobily down the stairs, you know. It's just like this endless
Yeah,
emphasis that is not true to life, is not true to anybody's life experience, that they'd be thinking this way about themselves, for example, if they're the protagonist.
yeah,
Yeah, I always thought in some ways, in some way that's easy with Odile because she's a very repressed person, and so I didn't get the sense that she is somebody who would be comfortable thinking about sexuality too much, even to herself. You know, moments in um, there's moments in her consciousness in the first part of the book where she's blushing at her own thoughts. You know, she's uncomfortable with even the thoughts that she's having, which I think is, you know, is true to experience for a lot of people. And then in the second half, things are a little bit more bleak. Um, yeah, it was always a deliberate choice. I knew that I never wanted to write sort of a sexist, you know, a misogynistic or objectifying book. It didn't make sense. I care too much for Odile and respect her dignity as a person too much. So I think that I suppose if there's any, you know, advice to other, like, you know, straight male authors, it would be just to, like, you know, think of your characters as full people, and that doesn't mean that they have to be non-sexual beings, obviously.
yeah.
Like, you know, Odile is different. It's a very chaste novel because she's that sort of person, but just write sexuality as a dimension of a part of a whole person, not a defining feature of the person at the expense of everything else.
So true.
Wonderful, wonderful. Um, I still am finding hard to grasp that this is your debut novel. It is so wonderful. It's so spectacularly written with this amazing premise, and I'm sure, and there is a lot of acclaim for the novel right now. How are you dealing with it, especially Jimmy Fallon? It's sort of in the top four.
That was
How's
weird.
it dealing with all the fame of With the Other Valley?
Um, it's okay. I think that the Jimmy Fallon thing was really weird. Just to see the book on it, him just doing all these gags with it and stuff. That was pretty surreal. But yeah, the rest of, I mean, my life hasn't changed too much. You know, I'm still just, you know, still just rent an apartment in East Vancouver and try to write each day. I think that, yeah, if I stay off the internet, basically everything is really normal. You know, I haven't.
Wow.
Yeah, I sometimes I go into a bookstore and I'll say like, oh, hey, I'm so and so, and they'll be like, oh, I know. I'm like, oh, I didn't realize I was recognizable. So that's the most famous moment I've had. It's just being recognized in a local indie bookstore a couple of times.
And that's so fantastic. And, you know, we really want to give a huge shout out to, you know, one of our favorite authors, Marjan Kamali, you know, from whose stories we discovered, you know,
Oh, yeah.
you. So she's kind of recommended your book, and she's like, it was way back, I think, almost 6-7 months back, if I'm not wrong, Neeraj, when, you know, kind of you saw that story, and then we discussed and we read the premise of the book, and then we found, oh, it's not available in India. And we were just waiting for you know, the book.
Yes, and
Yeah.
in a way, I found it so endearing also that, you know, in this very capitalist world of, you know, very stiff competition and everything, I could see the entire group of authors actually praising each other's books and everything, and that is how we got to come across your book. So shout out to Marjan Kamali, of course, and any thoughts on that of you know, authors or artists collaborating rather than competing?
Yeah, I think that that's become a lot more normal in the last kind of like this last generation or so of publishing. I think it's become like the idea of rivalries between authors has sort of gone away. And I'm not sure why exactly, like I'm pretty new to the scene, but my speculation would be that as a lot of sources of book coverage have gone away, as newspapers close and the newspapers that still exist have drastically shrunk their arts coverage, especially book coverage. I think there's a little bit more banding together, and you know, so on things like social media, you end up wanting to sort of promote each other and get visibility for each other as a response, perhaps, to the lack of other opportunities. You know, yeah, I didn't realize that you'd heard about it through Marjan. That's great. I got to thank Marjan again. Yeah, I remember talking with her when I met her, and she was asking about the book, and when I said it was a time travel sort of story, or at least the world had time travel involved, she was like, "Oh, I don't know. I mean, I have a really hard time with time travel." And then as I talked about it more, I said something like, "Oh, well, there's no time machine." And then she just lit up. She's like, "Oh, well, if there's no time, that's much more interesting." Somehow she's, yeah, I think about her every time that I talk about that aspect of the book, because it really kind of shifted it for her, that that it mattered, that there was no machine, that it was just something as simple as walking to another place, another time. For some reason, that kind of got her over the genre sort of bias, I guess. And I've read a lot of people, and not just her, say that, "Oh, I usually don't like this kind of book, but then I couldn't stop reading this book." So that's always really nice to read, that it's connecting with readers who are not hardcore sci-fi or fantasy readers, that it's actually kind of like traversing genres a little bit.
Absolutely. And we're also thrilled for her next novel that is coming up, though it is still not available in India, and we're waiting for it.
I don't think is it out yet?
Waited for you.
The Lion Women of Tehran. Is it out? Is it just out recently or soon? Yeah.
Yeah, so I think we'll get it in July. So we're waiting for it. But yeah, Scott, I mean, such brilliant, book. And there is one question that, someone, I think Akshay had asked in the comments. I'll just take that question as well. Okay. So in your book, the absence of quotations is quite noticeable. Is there a hidden meaning or an Easter egg behind this choice, or is it simply a unique aspect of your writing style? So yeah, there is this question from one of our listeners.
Yeah, the quotation mark thing, the first draft of the book had quotation marks, and then when I reread it and started to revise it, I stripped them all out and I liked it better. And so from then on, I wrote it that way. I think that the reason that I liked it better was that this entire story is Odile's story. It's her voice. She's a first-person narrator. She's talking to us the whole time about her experience. And I really wanted her voice to kind of infect everything. Basically, I wanted it to be a totalizing experience where even when we're hearing about what Edmé said, what Hélène said, what Jean Saville said, it's always coming through her, and there's never the appearance of this kind of like pause in her voice. I felt like the quotation marks, you kind of just flow along with Odile. If you add quotation marks, you end up kind of having this, I don't know, like almost like this artificial objectivity that interrupts her voice. I didn't like it. I have no objection to quotation marks. And a lot of people on the internet seem to have really strong opinions about it. But I think that it's pretty easy to follow, like I wouldn't have written it the way that I did if it was really hard to follow. And it's a pretty common device. I was thinking about this the other day, though, that the reason, what I see a lot is people say, "I thought this was going to be hard, and then it was really easy." And I was reflecting on why that's the response. And I think that the reason why it's easy is actually not surprising, because the way that we all learn language in the first place, the way that we all first experience stories, is by being read to. A parent or a guardian or a sister or an auntie, they will read to us a story, and we don't know what a punctuation mark is. But what we hear is, "Oink said the pig, moo said the cow." And as kids, we can understand, okay, the cow said moo, and I know where the dialogue starts and stops there. So this is something that we grasp without having to like see visual notation to grasp it. So I think that that's why it's actually pretty second nature as soon as we start reading it, to be like, okay, I understand. I think you guys are talking about Jenny Erpenbeck next, right? And she's another author who does this. All of her books, I believe, are the same way.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're loving it. We've already started reading it and thoroughly enjoying it. Yeah.
It's a dark story.
Yeah, it is. But yeah, I mean, such stories make, a reader a reader. So, it also kind of changes you. With every book, a reader changes, and that's what the reading experience is all about. You would know that better than us. So, yeah, very quickly, Scott, just wanted to ask you, since, how much time you took to write this book, because this looks like a long time journey.
Yeah, I don't know. I never know where to start the process because I had the first idea for it 10 years ago, and then I didn't do anything with it for several years because I was still an academic philosopher at that time, and that's like a full-time. You don't have, at least I didn't have the mental energy to do anything else. I just had this idea, and now and then I'd think about it again and think, oh, I still kind of like that idea. I'd like to do something with that someday. I think I started I started kind of puttering around with trying to write in 2017. So that would be 7 years ago. What is it? And then I didn't really start writing until 2018. And I finished it in 2021. So I guess it's kind of like 3-4 years, I would say, of pretty intense work. Yeah, it's hard, but the first
And
book,
definitely looks like that.
yeah. Yeah, I have to write my second one a lot faster, so it's scary.
So would you like to tell us what is that about? Maybe a little bit of it.
No, I mean, I think it's a story about a relationship. So Odile, like the story of The Other Valley, is very much it's a romance in a way, but it's very much about one person. And
Wow.
the second book is very much about a couple. And it deals with some environmental issues, but not, I wouldn't call it cli-fi or anything like that. It's just, it's dealing with kind of dynamics of hope and despair about the future and about having kids in this world. And it's also about philosophy and art. So, yeah, it's a hot
Wow.
right now.
Can't wait.
Yeah, one thing before we move ahead, Ekta, I actually wanted also to point out that, your book, because you said that it is easy, but, when you pick it up, you think that it is, because of the premise, it is difficult, right? And it has become, so for a lot of my students who want to embark on the journey of reading, I have found this book a unique, combination of something which is easy to read. You can turn the pages very quickly, but then you end up asking such deep questions to yourself. So I just wanted to thank you for that because when it comes to book recommendations, it becomes really difficult.
That's great to hear. Yeah. What age of students are you talking about? Are they?
So these are 16 plus. So
Great.
These are, yeah.
That's really cool. Thank you.
So Scott, before we kind of conclude this, and I think we all can go on talking to you all night here because in India it's like 11:15
Yeah,
in
thank you
the
for
night.
staying up to talk to me.
So we can go on and on, but just to very quickly, we want to ask you a couple of questions, which is kind of a rapid fire that we have.
Okay.
So
All right, I'm ready.
So yeah, I just wanted to ask you, who's your favorite author?
Oh man, that's a rapid fire question.
I know it's a difficult question.
I mean, I feel like I should say something classic, so I'll say Virginia Woolf, I suppose. Yeah, I'll say Virginia Woolf. But contemporaries, I really love Jenny Erpenbeck, actually, and obviously I really love Kazuo Ishiguro.
Amazing. All right, Neeraj, this is rapid fire. You have to ask the next
Yeah,
question.
I was actually thinking about the next question, and I was also there. Yeah. So the second question that we have is who, like, apart from the unfair question, who is your favorite author? What's your favorite book or books?
I think, I mean, Kafka, The Trial, maybe is a big favorite. I think of the Ishiguro novels, I would say probably Remains of the Day is my favorite. Of the Virginia Woolf stuff, I would say probably To the Lighthouse is my favorite. Yeah, I don't know. I have a lot of favorites. That's hard.
And quickly, what are you reading right now?
I think I have it here. I'm reading a short story collection by Shashi Bhatt called Death by a Thousand Cuts.
Oh.
I've only read a few. It's really good. I just saw her talk in Vancouver a few weeks ago and enjoyed it. So yeah, short stories. And I'm also doing a bunch of functional stuff. I'm reading some like academic history of sound art, like John Cage and stuff like that. But that's for the next book. So yeah.
Amazing. And Scott, any message that you would want to pass on to Reader Kitab community? So just to give you a context, I don't know if you know the word kitab. Kitab in Hindi means book. So the club is called Read a Book, and read is an English word, and so, and kitab is in Hindi, so it's a combination of both the things. So the club is called Read a Kitab. So yeah, we would just want to have something from you that you would want to talk out to the community.
I'd just thank you so much for reading the book, for choosing the book, and for engaging with it. It's so great to talk to you and to be able to answer the questions. Which are all really thoughtful, and many of which I've never encountered before, so that's also great. Keeps me on my toes. I think that keep on doing what you're doing, I suppose. Like, this just seems like a great club with it flatters myself to say great choices, but the other books you're mentioning, like Daisy and Jenny, all sound so good.
Thank you, Scott, and it's been such a pleasure to have you. And we loved your book. I don't have the Kindle, so I'm not able to showcase the book.
I'm having the other Valley.
Yeah,
I could show my version.
Wow.
My backwards copy.
And we're still waiting for hard copies to arrive. So it's taking so much of time. So we bought it on Kindle and read it. So yeah, amazing. And thank you, Scott, for agreeing to be with us and talking to you. We are so honored, and we
Absolutely.
love talking to you, and we love the book immensely.
Thank
and
you.
I'm sure this is going to be a very, very big success. And
Already
we
is.
wish you all the best. Yeah, already is. And in India, I mean, a lot of people are loving the book.
That's great.
So lots of love from India, and a lot of people are enjoying the book. And
So, Ekta, if I may
now-
ask, Scott, like,
Yeah.
did you also accept, because in India I think it's really very successful. So, did you get any reactions, and how was your reaction to the success that your book is enjoying in India?
The success in India is only just kind of like hitting me now. I think that I'm starting to hear more and more from India in the last couple of weeks, and I believe that I've got interviews lined up with the Hindu, the Hindustan Times, the Week. There's things coming up.
Wow.
I don't know exactly when, but I just heard about it today. So yeah, it seems like it's doing well. That's great. It's probably you guys.
We shall take that.
So yeah, thank you
so much.
Thank you, Scott,
Thank you,
for being with
Scott.
us. Lots of love, and waiting for your next book. And
book.
again, we'll keep on pushing people. We keep on nudging people to read The Other Valley, because we
Yes.
thoroughly loved
Enjoyed
it.
Thank you so much.
And hope to talk to you soon.
Yes.
Yes. All right. Thank you. I've enjoyed this so
Thank you.
much. Thanks so much.
Scott, thank you so much.
Thank
you so much.
Thank you for your
Have a
time.
great
Bye,
day.
everybody. You too.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Good night.
Bye. Good night.
Good night. Bye.
Good morning.